This past August, I went out to Oklahoma and spent a week out there with what remains of the Delaware Nation that back during the time of the American Revolution, Coshocton was their headquarters. It was their capital for the Lenape Nation. So we'll talk a little bit about that, give you a sense of their culture and just how prominent Coshocton County and Coshocton in particular was back in the 1700s. And to kind of paint that picture, if you think about to our east, we have Pittsburgh now, which at the time was Fort Duquesne when it was under the French, and then Fort Pitt when it was under the English. And the trail that came west came right out of Fort Pitt, and then you had Fort Duquesne, Fort Detroit, up to the north. So we were right in the middle in that passageway. So a lot of troops would come through here, and the Indians were here as well. And if I start to talk too soft that you can't hear me, let me know, but I think I'll be okay. That translation under the word welcome there literally means I am glad because you come. So certainly I'm glad that everybody is here today to hear what we're going to talk about. As I mentioned, you're going to get a little bit of a culture lesson with some history sprinkled in about the Lenape or the Delaware Indians. You'll hear me use those terms kind of interchangeably throughout the day. Delaware is the European name that was given to the Lenape because of their original homeland. That was along the Delaware River over on the east coast, named for Lord Delaware, the governor of the Jamestown colony at the time. This is a view from out in Anadarko, Oklahoma, and I'm sure that folks that maybe had never heard of Anadarko before are now starting to hear that word more and more with the shale drilling and that's coming around. One of the major players in that is a company by the name of Anadarko. And it was interesting when I was out there, not only in Anadarko, but in Bartlesville as well, to drive by the refineries and everything was absolutely astonishing. This is a view from the back of the 10 acres that the Delaware Nation owns. So when we think going back in history, you know, the land that they encompass today, the Delaware Nation owns 10 acres. That's all they have to their name. They're part of a group with the Wichita and the Caddo Indians. So amongst the three of them, they do have control over 1,000 acres, and that's what we're looking out over there from their tribal complex.
Philadelphia, home of the Liberty Bell and Independence Hall. Historically, Philadelphia is known as the birthplace of the United States. But before it was the birthplace of a nation, it was part of a homeland, the homeland of the Lenape people. Standing on top of Philadelphia City Hall is a statue of William Penn, the founder of Philadelphia and the governor of what was in his time called the province of Pennsylvania. In 1683, 10 months after his arrival in the New World, Penn sat down to write his account of the native people of the area. He recorded his meticulous observations of the Lenape in a long letter to London.
They are generally tall, straight, well-built, and of singular proportion. They tread strong and clever, and mostly walk with a lofty chin. Their language is lofty, and I have made it my business to understand it, that I might not want an interpreter on any occasion. And I must say that I know not a language spoken in Europe that hath more sweetness and greatness than theirs.
In the 300 years since Penn wrote his account, much has changed. Cities and towns cover the landscape. The statue of Penn gazes out over a nation that has long been dominated by people of European descent. But where are the Lenape people today? The ancestors of the Lenape first settled in the Middle Atlantic area over 5,000 years ago. What we know as the Lenape way of life was in place more than 1,000 years ago. When Europeans first arrived in North America, they found the Lenape living in bustling villages, scattered over a vast area stretching from New York to the Delaware Bay, between the Hudson and Delaware rivers.
The translation of Lenape, our name for who we are, simply means the people, the common people, the people of the land. Some have said the original people. The Lenape is considered as a grandfather tribe. I've been told many stories and have talked with people of other tribes from back east that because of the vast area that the Lenapes covered, their spirituality, their sense of fairness, that they were considered a grandfather tribe in the sense that they were called upon to perhaps settle disputes between warring factions or tribes that were involved in disputes.
As I go along, I'll be sharing some clips from this video that I have permission to use for educational purposes, and it'll help kind of paint the picture of their history and their culture along the way. So we know that the original homeland then, as I mentioned, was over in the Delaware, New Jersey area along the Delaware River, in the area where Philadelphia would be today, and you heard the reference there to William Penn. You'll see Chief Tishkohan here on the side, and you see that he has a short beard, which is very uncommon in that the Lenape really didn't have facial hair. A lot of times they would even pull their hairs out, they would pluck them. But the Lenape were tall and a straight people, like you saw in the one section there of the video, described as having broad shoulders, strong, smooth muscles, and they would use a little dab of bear grease to make their hair shine. It's not unusual for the Lenape to have tattoos or to decorate their bodies with reds, yellows, blacks. Necklaces were often made from bones, perhaps shells, or large seeds. Some of them used stone pendants. Bone and antler combs for their hair were used as decoration quite a bit. As we look at some of the aspects of their culture, the clothing that they wore was very simple. In the warm weather, the men and boys, they might have worn just basically a deerskin breechcloth. The girls and the women, a wraparound skirt. In the colder winter weather, they would wear fur robes, some soft-soled moccasins, and what we would call leggings. every Lenape belonged to an extended family that was related through the mother's side. When a man and woman married, they had to be from a different clan. So there were 3 clans of the Lenape, which we'll talk about a little later. There was the turtle, the turkey, and the wolf. So if the woman was from the turtle clan, then her husband either had to be from the wolf or the turkey tribe. And then the children would belong to the clan of their mother. One of the other unique relationships is that a son of a chief could never be chief. It was always a grandson or perhaps an uncle. An example of this would be Chief Kilbuck, a name that perhaps we recognize from the Kilbuck Creek, the village of Kilbuck. He was the grandson of the previous chief, Netawatwees, who actually moved the capital to Coshocton. The elders of the Lenape tribe, the older people were very much loved and respected. Grandmothers would help take care of the young children, often making clay pots, weaving mats or perhaps baskets. Grandfathers would help with fishing nets, bows, arrows, wooden bowls, and things like that. And the grandparents would often teach the children through storytelling, which was very, very popular among many of the Indian tribes, not just the Delaware. Everyone in the Delaware tribe had a right to speak when the council was held to determine what was best for the particular group. And we'll have an example of that right here in Coshocton later on. The Lenape have a specially designated person known as the name giver to give children their names. And this was very important to the Delaware because it was the name by which God and the good spirits would know that person. No one else could have that name, and an Indian almost never told anybody what his or her real name was outside of their immediate family. The naming would often not take place for perhaps 4 or 5 years as the child matured a little bit, because so often they died young. Instead, they were given a nickname, and that's where we hear like Little Flower or Running Squirrel. It was in that short period of time before they were given their Indian name. This is Linda Poolaw, who I met out in Oklahoma, and she is currently the name giver for the Delaware Nation. The language, the Delaware language is a spoken language historically. It's not one that has ever been a written language, written down. And as we noted earlier, there are a couple of key dialects that you might have seen in that one slide. The Unami, which is spoken by those Delaware in Oklahoma, and then there's also a Muncie dialect, which is spoken up in Canada and in the Wisconsin area. At the beginning of the 20th century, so when the 1900s came on the scene, most of the adult Delawares spoke Delaware as their first language. But then by the 1960s, so in 60 short years, only about 25 people remained, and by the 1980s, only 2 people were left that knew the Delaware language before they learned English. So because of this, most of the Delaware language has been lost. Several efforts are underway right now to try to revive the language, including through some university funding that the Delaware have received. Here's a sample as we hear one of the elders teach us to count to the number 10.
1, Kut